Recorded. All right, well, happy new year. This is our very first 2022 Cando Links to Learning, and we got some amazing guests. What a great day.
Sorry, just to interrupt, sorry, but it's asking me to ask you to give me permission to record. So.
Okay, thanks, Dale.
Sorry.
So we have some awesome guests who are helping us kick off this new year. So we got Dale and Colleen who are here with us. They're joining from BC. So my name is Michelle Nevadomi. I'm joining from Emiskouchi, Waskagan, so Edmonton, Treaty 6. And I was just bragging about our weather today. I was joking how I should really be hosting this from outside because we got a +4 day and we are celebrating that here in our city. So I hope wherever you are, that you are warm, you're enjoying your day, and that you really count your blessings. You know, Creator, we just give thanks for the gift of another day, this opportunity to come together as a virtual community and just take in the knowledge and the wisdom that's being passed on. So welcome to Cando Links to Learning. There is an evaluation link that's going to be sent to you at the end of this. And when you fill that out, there are 2 $100 Visa gift cards up for grabs. So when you fill that out, your name is going to be entered. So make sure you let your voice be heard. We always really appreciate your feedback and your voice. And also any suggestions you may have for any webinars moving forward. So welcome, we're honored you're here. So I just want to give a shout out to our guest speakers, our guest presenters. I feel like we're friends, we're family. I've listened to them present many times and they just come with really good resource, really good practical knowledge, and they have just understanding. And so today's topic is disaster recovery preparation. So if your community has not been impacted before, or even if it has, and it's not if, it is when the disaster will happen. And we really have seen this play out in our organizations, our communities, our cities, and our country with this COVID-19. 2 years into this pandemic. And so we're really, coming to understand how important it is to have a disaster plan in place. So if for a community that is prepared to respond to the economic impacts of any disaster, that will help them to recover faster. So today's session will explain the 10. I'm going to make sure you're going to cover those 10 key steps, Dale, your community can take to be better prepared to respond to the economic impacts of the disaster that will come to your community soon. So Colleen and Dale will explain these 10 steps, also highlighting what they have witnessed firsthand in working with communities impacted by different natural and man-made disasters. Pardon me. So Dale, he's joining us with 26 years, Dale, of economic development experience and is the CEO of the BC Economic Development Association and one of the founding partners of EDCD Consulting. And I believe they talk a little bit about their business. Starting out as in economic development in a rural BC community, he then moved to Chilliwack, where he worked to make Chilliwack one of the leading economic development communities in BC. He is in demand as a speaker with a presentation style combining humor with simplicity for understanding, and I can attest to that. And then Colleen Bond is a certified economic developer with 24 years of economic development experience. She has extensive knowledge in building economic development programs for business retention and expansion, business attraction, and foreign investment attraction. She has worked from grassroots to government organizations in a variety of community development and capacity building roles, earning her awards along the way. So congratulations and shout out to you, Colleen. She co-founded EDCD Consulting to provide consulting services to economic development agencies at all levels of government. So that's just a little snippet of these two fantastic presenters this afternoon. So I'm going to pass this virtual mic over to them, and we welcome you too. Thank you for lending your voice this afternoon. So Dale and Colleen, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much. I don't know. It's always so hard. Like, like you get to the point, Colleen, it's that speaker that's in front of you that you fear the most. And Michelle, yeah, she does that. She's the one I fear following, because there's just so much energy in what she does that it just it's like, how do we match that? How do we possibly match it? So no pressure, Colleen, but I'm going to put all that matching onto you today. You have to have the energy.
Well, I like that she keeps us young because we never give her updated bios. So
That is
I think we're closer to 30 years and 28 years now as time has rolled on, but I'll stick to that 5 years less for sure on that. So
yeah, those are the certain things that you don't correct going along here, right? So yeah, we shouldn't say want, we do want to talk about disasters today, though. We have all seen disasters strike our communities. We used to talk about those communities that we knew had been impacted, and we'd spend a lot of time in those communities that would have been impacted. But now, I think, Colleen, I don't think there's a community out there that hasn't been impacted by a disaster from COVID-19, where everybody has had to pivot, has had to change, has had to do those things differently than what they used to do before, because the disaster did strike. There's no denying that. We have done a lot of different work. But Colleen, why don't you talk a little bit about and first of all, and I should mention that I actually today am speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Siksika people, where I work and live. And but Colleen, why don't you talk a bit about the company and some of the things that we've done? I'll talk a bit about the associated company.
okay, you came in and out on that, so I think you just said for me to talk about what we do.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, we work with a lot of communities with regards to the disaster recovery and the economic recovery. So we're really focused on that economic piece versus working with communities like the Red Cross and things like that, and your own municipal or local governments who work to get the individuals and the residents in and out safely after and during a disaster. And we come in after the fact to talk to communities how to get their economies back up and running as quickly as possible. And it's something we've really been talking about now going on almost 10 years. And unfortunately, most communities haven't really listened as much as we think they should have. With COVID, that's sort of been an equalizer. I think a lot of times communities have thought, these disasters are going to happen somewhere else. We're not going to get flooded. We're not going to have a tornado or whatever it might be, right? It's going to happen somewhere else. And COVID really was a disaster for every single community, and still continues to be in different levels globally. So that sort of opened up communities' eyes to making it more of a priority, a rising priority, that we've got to be ready for a disaster, and their communities are seeing it now. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And this is just some of the disasters that we've worked on over the last number of years, Burns Lake all the way through down now to the BC flooding that happened in the late fall of last year. It was November of last year. And we're just starting to work with those communities in their economic recovery on that. And we've gone everywhere in between as well. So what we really want to talk to you today is about not, what a disaster is and all of that. We really want to give you those 10 steps, and promise, Michelle, there will be 10 on there, but the 10 key components that you need to have in place for your economic recovery.
Yeah, so Colleen, the Economic Disaster Recovery Program has been, we started that for the BC Economic Development Association, I guess it was back in 2012. And again, we have done, a lot of these disasters. and we've seen things from flooding to fires to typhoons. We've been involved going in afterwards, and we'll talk about some of the ones that we think have really done well, like I think Saskatchewan, Colleen, that they were, a lot of the communities were trying to pre-plan for a disaster. So we'll go through these and really talk about sort of quickly, what is a disaster, and I think Michelle's comments, really hit it off there when she said, it's not if, it's when. And for years I lived in the Fraser Valley. I lived right where the flooding happened in that area, and it was always like, oh, this isn't really going to happen. We're so well prepared, and then we're buried in water. And I think it shows that you can be as prepared as you want to be, but when that disaster strikes, you just never know. Like you can't really predict, because disasters are really not predictable, except from the sense that it will happen. We just don't know when, how hard it's going to hit, and how, when we look at the damages from the last flooding in 2021 there in the fall, and we look at the Fraser Valley, but more, I want to say more importantly, but we look at the communities in the interior of the province, like the Princeton, BC, or the Merritt and the in the Indigenous communities between Merritt and Spencer's Bridge, or the village of Lytton last summer. I mean, those were devastating disasters that struck the communities, and they're still not recovered. And I'm not confident, Colleen, that they're going to be recovered anytime soon. It's going to take a long time, years to overcome what hits. That hit might not have been there if the community was really ready for a disaster. Anything else to that?
Yeah, I think you said it exactly. Getting your disaster or your community disaster ready is really about putting those strategies and initiatives and programs into place that you can pre-disaster, because it does take an awful long time to recover after a disaster. We've seen that time and time again, and we're definitely, as you said, Dale, we're definitely going to see that in the communities here from the flooding and the fire in Lytton.
There's 4 different phases of a disaster. And typically, when you're in your communities and you're doing your emergency management plans or your disaster preparedness plans, you're looking, okay, what are those mitigation initiatives that we should be doing as a community? So the mitigation being, building the dikes, the berms, the preparing your community from a fire smart perspective, so that there's brush clearing and you're burning around the community or clearing around the community, so that when a fire comes in, it doesn't get into the actual community itself, and it's it's maybe burning the land on the outside of that area that you've prepared. Those are your sort of typical, your common mitigation efforts that you're putting in place, and then you're preparing. So there's, like Colleen said, is that planning, all of those initiatives that you're going to take, whether it's for your emergency management plans, your pre-disaster economic recovery plans, all of those types of initiatives. Then those disasters strike, and there's that response phase that needs to happen. And mainly in the response phase, you're protecting property, you're protecting people, and you're making sure that you're taking the steps necessary to make sure that nobody is seriously hurt or killed, or loss of life. And so you're responding to the immediate needs as they happen. But sometimes, even during the response phase, there's initiatives that you could be doing that could help in that rebuilding effort or help in that recovery effort once the disaster is over. And then, of course, there is that recovery phase. And from our experience, communities are well prepared for those other 3 things: the mitigation, the preparedness, and the response. For the most part, communities are sort of well prepared in that area, Colleen, but they're not really well prepared when it comes to that recovery phase. And maybe the recovery phase, they're prepared to rebuild infrastructure, or I'm not so sure, but I got to say, I give hats off to our government for how quickly, Highway 3 was able to be open to commercial traffic, or Highway 5, the Coquihalla, or and things that are happening but are we prepared for that economic recovery? Are we prepared to get our people back to work? Are we prepared to bring trades and services into the community and supplies? There's still communities that are challenged now in getting the supplies and services that they need to help in their recovery. Colleen?
Yeah, so really what we're going to talk about in those 10 steps, a lot of them are covered under being prepared, right? It's writing your economic recovery plan. That's really what we want to sort of set you up with today. And so you need to really understand what those reasons are. What are you preparing for? What's the disaster that you're sort of looking for? And you know, we talk all the time about economic development and how it's not something that you do alone. It's not something you sit at your desk and you know, accomplish by any stretch of the imagination. It's about working with your stakeholders, with your partners, with your citizens, with all of these people, whether they're within your own community or whether they're outside your community boundaries. So really understanding who are those people that you can bring to the table to help you develop this, to plan and develop the plan and to be prepared. And that works into building that team. We'll talk about what we mean about your planning team, as well as a team that we will call your economic recovery team, if you will. It is that consultation piece. It's no different really than if you sit down to do an economic development strategy. You do need to have some consultation, and we certainly suggest that you have some of those folks that you're going to be consulting with once you start to do this plan. And unfortunately, Dale, this isn't we have a state there, but it should say provincial, of course. But so coordinating with your provincial and your federal agencies to find out what they've already got in plan, right, or in play. You know, what type of those programs do they already have that you're able to capitalize on and to build upon, or just to even use, right? Why reinvent the wheel if at the provincial or federal level that something is already done for you as a community. And then again, we talked about this a couple slides back there, is acknowledging that this recovery does take time. It's not something that's going to happen. And I think, again, really clear is COVID has shown us that, right? Who would have thought that almost 2 years later, we're still recovering from COVID? We're still having to put so much pressure and responsibility, and you know, the word pivot is out there still again and again and again on our businesses, and that just really, I think, clearly illustrates that recovery is not a quick turnaround by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, if you're not, and if you're not prepared, you're not resilient. So, I mean, we all talk about resiliency in our communities, resiliency for our families, our residents, everybody that lives in our communities. But if we're not really prepared for when those disasters strike, we're not. And I think, Colleen, as you said, you know, we hear that word pivot. We've heard that word pivot probably more in the last 2 years than you and I have heard in our lifetime. You know, it's not a long time, but you know, for some of us anyways, but we've pivoted so many times. How many times are we going to pivot? But again, that really all leads to resiliency as well as our ability to pivot. And so we need to, you know, we need to look at ways of reducing those risks. We need to work together. We can't work in isolation. We've got to work with our neighbors. We've got to work with our neighboring communities. We have to work together as a region, as a province, even to better prepare for when these disasters strike. We need to prepare for the known, and the known in most cases, at least in Canada, are those things like fires, are those things like floods. Those are the sort of those known things that we need to prepare for. But what about the unknowns? And the unknowns being those things like those COVIDs that may happen. Or Colleen, you and I were recently in the Lower Mainland, and we were in Richmond, and it was the day that we came into Richmond where I think it was not a typhoon, but a hurricane or a cyclone or whatever hit part of Richmond, and it was like, we probably wouldn't have planned for that because that's not something that we've ever really experienced before in British Columbia. So how do we minimize the impact of that disaster that strikes? and then of course recover faster from anything, from anything that might hit us. There's a lot of different things, and as Michelle pointed out, there's 10 different things that we need to do to be better prepared. And the 10 things that we want you to put into your plans. And I will say that near the end of the presentation, we are going to provide you with some resources, some toolkits that we'll send the links to Michelle, and they can circulate out to everybody in attendance today. But there's a couple of different manuals. Some of the one manual covers some of these particular items and help provide you with some templates in order to develop these for your own communities. But we need to look at that task force and how do we pull everybody together? Who do we pull together? That Center for Economic Recovery, who's going to be involved in that? Where's it going to be? And we'll talk about each of these, the community engagement and how we get the businesses back into our community, and then the workforce, the financing, the capacity building. How do we work with our workforce to make sure that people are coming back and people are going back to work? How are we revitalizing our communities following a disaster? What are those different types of things that we could be doing to make us more resilient, to make sure that our communities can withstand other things, but also to create some new, if you want, some new fresh ways of looking at our community. And there's some really good examples of that. Communication strategy, and I actually really think that one of the things that will help you recover the quickest is some real solid communications programs, keeping people informed as to what's happening during the disaster, but also what steps the community is taking after the disaster. And then, of course, those federal and provincial programs for recovery, and knowing what those programs are.
Okay, and actually, Dale, if I can, sorry, just get you to do this one. I just see Canada Post is coming up my drive with something for me to sign for.
Okay, sounds good. The fact that they're there is a great thing. So there you go. So on the Economic Recovery Task Force, and this is one of those templates that's included in that manual, but this, when COVID first started, we had always told communities that they should look at establishing ahead of time what an economic recovery task force would look like. And of course, afterwards, more and more communities have all created these. They call them different things. It could be a business task force, it could be whatever, but essentially it's an economic recovery task force, and they will take on the responsibility of recovering from that disaster. So they'll manage all aspects, and typically on that committee is not just politicians. It's like maybe a local government representative, but there's also representatives from your emergency teams, representatives from your chambers or regional communities. If you're near a neighboring local government, maybe a representative from them should be involved on that committee. But mainly your goal, anybody that's involved in workforce agencies should be involved. Those types of people should definitely be on your task force. And again, you're communicating with the task force, but you're also communicating with the community, as you're in this task force can help lead what those communications are, to keep them informed, to keep the residents informed as to what steps are being taken to help the community recover. They're implementing recovery plans, and then again, they're identifying other programs and initiatives that the community or region could be doing to make sure that the recovery is going smoothly. Anything else to add there, Colleen? Hope you got any personal. And you're muted, so that's good.
I think I heard most of it, so I'm sure you covered it off. But the only thing I would say, in case I didn't miss it, Dale, is the folks that you're gathering around the table for your economic recovery, these are really the people that you should be having in play to put together the plan. And I'm sure you kind of mentioned that, but just in case you didn't, yeah.
I did.
So I'll talk about then the Center for economic recovery. And this is something, again, you know, you've got your team around the table to start putting this plan together. One of the things that you'll want to do pre-disaster is to have an area located, a building located, whatever it is, for the economic recovery, a center for economic recovery. And this is really focused, again, on the businesses. It's not a recovery center for residents and those sort of things that are already usually established, right? This is strictly for your economic recovery. So this is where your businesses can go, separate from where the residents would go, to talk about, you know, the different programs, to get the assistance that they need, whether it's through different programs, different agencies, all of those sort of things. So, you know, locate or determine where that location is going to be pre-disaster. So in your plan, you can say, you know what, if something happens and but let's just stick with floods here. If we're flooded, we're going to meet at 123 Main Street, right? That's where our center is going to be. But keep in mind that 123 Main Street may be flooded. You don't know where the disaster is going to happen, right? So have an alternate location as well. So, and even have maybe a third location. It doesn't matter, but have at least two locations identified pre-disaster in your plan of where this center can be set up. And what we found with communities that have been impacted by floods or fires is they've been sort of more creative in the sense that they've had a mobile center. So it's something that can move around, almost like a food truck, if you will, right? So a mobile unit that can go wherever it needs to go, which is a great idea if you can accommodate that. And what we saw with COVID, and Dale, you might want to talk about what you did with BCEDA on it, but, you know, there was that virtual center, if you will. You know, people couldn't meet, particularly in those early months of the pandemic. So people and organizations, communities, economic development, went onto their websites and developed sort of that virtual center, if you will. And BCEDA did have a good example of that. So I'll let you talk about that, Dale.
Yeah, so we when we set up, one of the things that because we talk about disasters, we are prepared for when disasters happen. And when COVID was announced, for an example, when the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic, we kickstarted our disaster program even prior to the province declaring, or the Canadian government declaring it a pandemic in our own jurisdictions. And we activated our online resources within a day of the World Health Organization declaration. And that particular program, it was a simple website. We just turned the switch on. On that website, we started to compile resources for communities, for businesses, and individuals. So our recovery center, if you will, sort of tried to cover all aspects of recovery for a community, again, focusing on the business and residents as well. We had a live document going, which we populated in real time. So anytime a level of government that would add a new program or initiative to help business or residents or individuals during the pandemic, we would populate that in this database. And it was online. It was a simple Google document that was live. So when things happened and we updated it, it was going live at the time we were updating it. And at any given time, we would have 500 to 5,000 people in that document at any given time from across Canada. Even though we were doing this for BC, the word got out, and we had federal organizations, provincial organizations, and then different associations and agencies all sharing our resources because it was the most up-to-date information at that time, readily available for anybody to be able to access. So just the ability to respond quickly when the declaration comes out. When the flooding happened in November 14th at that night, on the morning of November 15th at 9 a.m., we turned the switch on our flood resources. When the fires happened in the summer of 2021, same thing. Within a few short hours of the actual fire taking place, in Lytton, we had our page up and running with resources for people to access so that they could find out where to go, what to do. And so it's important to have that available even in your own community, is to have that switch. You can turn the switch on and direct people to where they can find information that they need to help them make the decisions they need for their family, for their businesses, etc. So we, this is one thing that, Colleen, I think that always frustrates us the most when we go into a community after a disaster. And that is how communities are not in touch with their businesses. They're not able to really communicate with their businesses, in an immediate forum to talk about the disaster that may be happening. We've gone into communities where a month or 2 months after a disaster has happened, that they've never talked to their businesses, or we've gone in and then we say, well, can you give us a list of your businesses? Well, we don't have them. Have a list of your businesses. Have a list of your contacts for those businesses. And when we talk about business, we're not just talking about, say, community-owned businesses like maybe your development corporations may own. We're talking about any type of business that is within the community, and that could be working out of their home. That could be, an artist doing art in his home or her home and selling it online. It can be a contractor who owns a couple of, pieces of equipment and what they're doing. Make sure you know all of your businesses and their contact information so that you can communicate with them pre-disaster and after disaster. It's important to talk to them ahead of time about the need for them to have business continuity plans, to educate them on how to go about developing a business continuity plan. We're hoping to be able to come out with a business continuity toolkit over the next 6 months or so as an extra value-added piece to our recovery programs. But so make sure that you're sharing this type of information. Conduct a needs assessment, and Colleen and I will be leading teams to go into communities impacted by the floods in November there. We're going to be going into the communities with teams of volunteers to meet with businesses to conduct a needs assessment to determine sort of what level of impact there was on the business, how much revenue loss, how many man hours of employment lost, to get an idea of the impacts on the workforce. That type of information will be gathered in an effort to be able to make arguments for additional financial resources from federal and provincial governments, maybe the Red Cross, etc. And then, of course, a pre-qualified supplier list. And this is something that we really seen, Colleen. I guess it was after the 2013 flooding in southern Alberta, and we did 11 plans in southern Alberta. We did 10 local governments and 1 Indigenous community, Sitka First Nations, an economic recovery plan there. And one of the things we really heard in these communities was how fake suppliers, fake contractors would come into the community and say that they were qualified drywallers or qualified plumbers or electricians or whatever, and then they weren't. And then that created additional problems for homeowners and business owners and dealing with insurance companies, etc. So make sure you have sort of a pre-qualified list, or if you don't have a pre-qualified list, when the time comes to recovery, set up a registration center for these businesses to where they have to come and be certified to work within the community and licensed to work within the community. And the town of Princeton is actually doing this fairly well, where they have a program and where these businesses will come in from out of town, register with them, and then local businesses or residents can say, okay, you're licensed, you're with the community, we know you're legitimate, and we'll hire you to do the work. So, stuff like this can really help a business overcome any sort of longer term challenges that they may face. And it's really important to focus on those businesses, because if you don't have those businesses in your community, it's really hard to support the residents going forward. So it's important to spend some time working with businesses and understanding what their needs are. But if you don't know them, it's hard to do that.
Mm.
Can't say enough how important it is to do that.
Yeah, and I'm sure you addressed it as well as your business community. There needs to be representation on that economic recovery task force for sure. We are talking about the recovery of your economy, which is your businesses. So make sure that you've got some of those folks sitting around the table because they know what they need. Versus, some communities that set up these task forces with only maybe local government representatives, and they need to be there too, but it has to have a good match of those folks along with your business community for sure. Let's talk about business reentry. And as Dale said, we are going to give you a couple of toolkits, point you in the direction of where you can find them. And those toolkits, one in particular, is going to provide you with templates. We've tried to make this as easy as possible for individuals and for communities to put together these sort of plans. And a tool and the templates will just fill in the blanks almost. It's not maybe quite that simple, but it's as simple as we possibly can make it. And one of the things we're going to have you talk about, when you get back to your own desks and get your group together, is to talk about how are you going to get your businesses back into the community after a disaster, and how are they going to re-enter. And what we find is, for the most part, communities, once they've been evacuated and the all clear is sent out, everybody comes back into the community at once. And the challenge that we find is, when people have been displaced by the community, regardless of the length of time, but particularly if it's a longer length of time, but when they've been displaced from a community, the first thing they really want to do is have comfort, right? They want that sense of normalcy back as fast as they possibly can. And what that typically means for us is we want to go to the coffee shop and sit down and just, have our special coffee, or we want to go and get groceries at the local store, or get gas and get our lotto tickets, maybe, whatever it is, right? It's these simple little things that give us that normalcy again. And when we open up our community to everybody coming in at one time, those businesses that are making the coffee, that are selling the groceries, that are filling your gas tank up, they haven't had time to get prepared for any of that. So we talk about in the manual that we'll give you and the templates, we'll talk about more of that reasoning about it and sort of what that hierarchy should be, if you will. Who's that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 of individuals that should come back into the community. And you can see it there, we tier 1, we talk about, those people that are involved directly with that emergency response. Obviously, those folks need to be in the community as soon as possible. Then the next tier that we sort of classify as those service providers, those relief organizations, if you will, those insurance people, the food people that just talked about, the gas, the coffee shop owner, all of those sort of folks, maybe they can come back in second to get that level of normalcy ready for when then we open it up to the next tier and have everybody come back in. And we're not saying that, these tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 dates are spread way apart. They don't have to be. So you can kind of also address that in your plan as to, tier 1 should be on this time after the disaster, tier 2 this time, and then open access. But we find that it really does help in the communities, a few communities so far that we've seen that have this tier system. It seems to work quite well.
And then, of course, we focus on capacity building, and it's, capacity is a number of different things. It's not just capacity being individuals or people. It's also the financial capacity to be able to implement different things. And we have to work with our organizations, whether it's our Economic Development Corporation or whether it's the government agency or whoever, to continue their operations in the event of a disaster. So when that disaster strikes, as Colleen had talked about earlier, where's your alternative office location going to be? And you know what? It's okay if it's in a neighboring community. Just make sure you have that plan in place as to where that office will be located, so that you know that you could, where you could direct people to for general services, and where you're going to be working out of after a disaster strikes. And you're going to establish the roles and the responsibilities for those that are involved in the recovery phase and the response phase, but also in the recovery phase, who's going to be responsible for what. Make sure it's very clear as to what role every organization or individual is going to be playing. Then you're going to strengthen those communication capabilities and make sure that you're able to reach out to your businesses, to your residents, to make sure that they're aware of the steps again that are taking place. And so you need to have a comprehensive database to be able to reach out to, because in a lot of cases, you will lose communications infrastructure. You might lose your internet. You might lose your phone system. You might lose, again, you're losing the physical location. When I think back of what happened with the Siksika First Nations and after the flooding and the loss of, not only the phone system, but the internet system, so many different systems and regular modes of communication, that you basically got down to the basics of bulletin boards or posting things in where residents may have been evacuated to. So you've got to look at all different types, and we'll talk a little bit about that around in the communication center. Again, have that communication strategy, which we will talk about, and then have a system to monitor both the post and then during the disaster. It's you need to talk about you need to know not only what's happening sort of right after the disaster, we need to know what's happening during the disaster, but remembering that after the disaster will take years. So again, you need to have that system in place and the capacity to be able to manage that ongoing recovery efforts. Well,
Yep, I agree with all of that, Dale. Well done.
thanks, Colleen. Workforce.
Yeah, and I think you talked about
Erica,
it.
Yes, Erica has. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, workforce and training. Over the last couple of years before the pandemic, we knew how important and how our labor pool was being stretched as it was, and the stress on our labor force was pretty big. And now with what's happened with the pandemic, it's even more. Our businesses are finding it really, really challenging to find labor. And one statistic I heard just a while ago was with regards to the restaurant industry, and that they were already crunched right before the pandemic, but with that added onto them, it's probably going to be 5+ years before they're back to the level they were pre-pandemic, which was already a stressed level, right? So we're really going to have to look at different ways that we can maintain our workforce for our businesses and to get the training and the skilled employees that they need. So one of the ways that we would talk about until we're blue in the face is business retention and expansion again, right? Talking to your local businesses to find out exactly what their needs are right now. And are they able to look forward? Are they able to look a year forward? Are they able to look 3 years forward? What are those needs that they're going to really have to have filled? And what are the challenges that they're seeing? And, when we talked earlier, Dale did, about the people that you're going to have around your table, that economic task force that's there. Mentioned in there, I heard was talking about those workforce institutions and the educational institutions, and these people really come into play here. Those partners, those key stakeholders to help those businesses fill the gaps, right? To develop the proper programs and the educational needs and fill those for the employees out there. And what we find when there's been a disaster and we've gone back in and talked to the businesses is, a lot of the businesses have lost their workforce even though they're allowed to go back into their community now, but they've lost their workforce or percentage of their workforce because of there's no housing for them now, right? A lot of the residents, their housing has been affected, and perhaps a community wasn't able to or didn't want to or hasn't been able to quickly enough, but build some sort of temporary housing. And so those employees have left the community. And I think the statistic is in these floods here, I think up to a third of the labor force will be gone from those communities. So that's a lot. So think of all of these numbers that we're talking about under a labor force that already was under stress. So what are some of those housing solutions can you think of pre-disaster, so that you're not, sitting around for the next 2 to 3 months trying to come up with the solutions, right? You've already got them in your plan. So what are some creative solutions that you can come up with to hopefully house? And we've seen very successful ones, Dale, when we talk about High River, sorry, I always get that wrong, High River, and the community that they built with some temporary housing that was very successful in keeping the residents in the community, and therefore keeping the labor force in the community. So talking to your labor force organizations, what are the different programs at the provincial level, at the federal level? We saw that with the pandemic, that employment insurance, they kind of we're able to massage that program a little bit, change some of the regulations. How can we start talking with those individuals and those representatives from those different levels of government, from those organizations? How can we talk about the different needs that may be required prior to any disaster happening, and have that as a strategy, something that you work on between now and when that disaster unfortunately is going to hit? Whether there's a temporary registration for employees, for your labor force. We've seen communities do that. And we've also seen communities work on a much more regional basis. So, if you've got a labor force in your own community of, say, it's 1,000, but if you kind of expand out, maybe look around maybe an hour outside your community on all ways, that maybe that 1,000 labor force can now expand to 3,000 or 4,000 or whatever that number is. You've expanded your labor force. You can work regionally and have a registration system in place on a regional basis to help more and more of your businesses that way with their labor force. And transportation becomes a huge issue as well, depending on what that disaster is. You may not be able to get in. We've seen that here in BC. It's been really, really challenging, that supply chain with the floods. We've had the major highways were closed. They've only just recently, here's my cat. They've only just recently opened up, but unfortunately it's winter conditions, and every single day there's an accident on it, and every other day it seems to be closing. So that transportation, those supply chains, really, really important to start to try to address in some way, pre-plan before your disaster. You're on mute, Dale. Say bye. Still on mute, Dale.
I have brilliant words coming out of my mouth too. Now, if I can remember them all. We had, I can remember in the Grand Forks flooding in 2018, where they were busing, we're talking about transportation again, that temporary worker, to try to rebuild their downtown. They were busing people from Castlegar, I believe it was, on a daily basis to be able to come back to the community to help rebuild. And you talked about High River and the temporary housing. It breaks my heart to see the fact that we've never had any temporary housing built for lit residents. Have been out of the community, for just about 7-8 months. They're going to be settled somewhere else. And your point is right. Will they stay in those other communities where they've now relocated to, or will they come back to help rebuild that community? And the same thing that we're seeing in some of the other communities that have been isolated or that have been, so heavily damaged by this flooding, and will they come back to the community afterwards, or will they find a new life somewhere else? So again, that impacts your longer term economy. So when you don't have the temporary housing or temporary access even to get to these communities, these are urgent issues that need to be dealt with to deal with potential for the workforce impact. And community revitalization, and recognizing that it isn't just one little core area in your communities that you're revitalizing after a flood or after a fire even. It's the whole community, and it's not just that one little area. How are you going to rebuild or maybe redevelop or revitalize other areas of your community? And so to have those, and we've seen some great examples of communities that have really been impacted by disasters. Honestly, we had some ideas around what Lytton could be doing. Unfortunately, we're not involved really in that, but there are some things that communities have done globally to rebuild after a disaster, where they pulled the community together and really consulted with them and decided, how are we going to build the community, the dream community, if you will, that we want to have, because this is our time. This is the opportunity to do that. You don't have to just do the same thing the same old way. There's new ways of doing things, and have those policies in place to speed up permitting, to make sure that the bureaucracy or any bureaucracy that may be there, whether it's local, provincial, federal, sort of, I hate to say get out of the way, but sort of makes things happen, makes it happen in a timely manner, so that people are not waiting for decisions for months and years to come. And again, you're planning for today's economy, not yesterday's. And how are you going to use those existing businesses that may have been damaged, and how can you transform those businesses or buildings to meet the needs of the community itself going forward? Colleen?
Yeah, this is actually a pretty simple one to do pre-plan or pre-disaster in your plan is take a look at what policies that you have in place today and how they can be adapted in the case of a disaster, and whether that's rebuilding. Patios are a perfect example if we talk about the pandemic, right? That many communities had policies in place for how a patio could be built or couldn't be built, that sort of thing. And once the pandemic hit and businesses, particularly restaurants, were closed down and they weren't allowed to have indoor dining, many communities were able to review their policies and change their policies and regulations, and were able to say, okay, you know what, you can build a patio. Some of the communities even took their municipal staff out and built them for the community or for the businesses. So there was lots of creative ways that they were able to respond to that. But we're kind of talking again, let's step back and not respond to the disaster. Let's pre-plan in the event of a disaster. And so what are those policies that you can review today and make some changes or amendments to, so when the disaster happens, you're able to implement immediately, saving, whether it's a day, whether it's a week, whether it's a month, doesn't matter, as long as you can save time and money for your businesses would be great too. But if you can do that and do that pre-planning and pre-disaster in your planning, that's really what we want you to do. And there's lots of different things you can look at. And I see we've probably got less than 5 minutes left, hey Dale. So let's move on to the next one. All of this stuff is in the toolkits that we're going to give you. So lots of information in there.
Talking about your business financing and looking at, can you have reserve funds to help with, business supports? Are there, what kind of agency supports are out there through, be it federal agencies, whether it's INAC or who might, or ITS, I guess it's called. you know, whether it's them or whether it's, you know, community futures organizations or others that may be able to provide that financial assistance to help communities recover. Colleen, you want to just kind of cover off the communications? And then I think
it can be done. Yeah. Dale talked about it right off the bat. You know, one of the key things that you can do is communication, pre-disaster, post-disaster, you know, anything regards with the disaster and your economic recovery. It's really talking to your businesses, talking to your residents, talking to your key stakeholders. You know, just a couple of key things for sure would be to make sure that you only have one voice, right? One voice is the one that's going to be talking about your economic recovery, and whomever that may be. Typically we see for economic recovery, that's your economic development individual, manager, coordinator, whoever it happens to be in your community. That's typically who it is. But why we say there's only one individual to address that economic recovery piece and communicating about what's happening with regards to that is we want to dispel as many rumors, as many untruths as we possibly can. And that can be because you're controlling the message with just one voice. It's talking to different levels of government as well. It's not just within your own community boundaries. You're talking regionally at times, you're talking provincially, you're talking federally. All of these things need to be communicated out. And you really want to understand who that person is going to be, how you're going to communicate, what your message of communication is going to be as well. And all of these things, again, can be done in your plan pre-disaster. And we've got all those templates for you as well in the toolkit. Woo.
one, number 10 is actually the next one, and it is actually related to the provincial and federal governments and sort of what are those supports that they provide. Now, and I will tell you, it's important to not just depend on those supports, and those supports are sort of scattered all over the place. It's not really a, you know, I don't want to be negative, but it's not a hugely coordinated effort. And we've seen even during COVID where it was a very reactive approach to dealing with the situation. And so their programs are designed to be reactive, not necessarily proactive, and something that you can just grab onto. So it's important to know what they are, but it is important to not just depend on it as well. It's important that you recognize in a disaster that it's not the same old, same old. You can't just keep doing things the way you used to do it. Be creative in your plans. What will you do differently going forward? And again, here's our templates. Michelle, we will email those to you so that you have them and can circulate them. One's a toolkit, one's got a toolkit plus some templates in it. So we'll send those to you, and you can share them with everybody. Don't care where they're from. Can be from anywhere.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you, Dale and Colleen. And there you have it, folks, the 10 steps that they have given to us in better responding to, you know, economic impacts of disasters that do happen. Like they said, it's not if, it is when. So, you know, I think the theme that I heard over and over again was plan, 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 communicate, connect with partners. There's tons of resources out there. And this all will be sent to you as well. So just stay tuned to your inbox and you will receive this. And so this is a great resource right in front of us. So Dale and Colleen with the EDCD, which is Economic Development and Community Development. And you two are just so great for bringing this good knowledge to the table today. And your cat, Colleen, I was just so happy to hear your cat chime in this conversation.
He's passionate about economic recovery.
So we do have time for maybe one question. Does anyone have a question out there? Also, like, did you guys put your contact information? I'm not sure if that's on one of the web, the slides that you had. There we go. So if you do, because we did run out of time, feel free to shoot any questions to these amazing people who carry a lot of wealth of knowledge and under this topic that we're talking about today. So shoot them a message if you have any questions. Their email is right there. But does anyone have any questions before, or one question, not questions, but one question before we move on? And I don't see anybody. Well, because I mean, that just goes to show how well you covered this topic. So again,
Well, they've probably written their plan already, Michelle.
That's right. It's such a pleasure, such an honor to be able to see you again and, you know, kick off this year with you too. And so thank you so much for just lending your voice to this topic and bringing your brilliance. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I hope wherever you are that you are well. I hope that you know that you are loved, that creator in this earth, you know, you're surrounded by that love and that goodness. So wherever you go today, drink some water, maybe head outside. We got +5 here in Edmonton, and just take a moment just to like soak in that goodness of land and creation that surrounded us. So thank you all for being here. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I hope that we see you again. Peace.
Bye.